My family openly laughed when I wore a $10 hoodie to my sister's lavish engagement party. Her arrogant fiancé mocked my finances in front of everyone, so I arranged a surprise corporate takeover that permanently destroyed his entire career. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. My vision actually blurred as I stood in the grand foyer of the country club. I had been awake for 72 consecutive hours. My temples throbbed with a rhythmic, punishing ache, and my stomach churned with the hollow nausea that only comes from excessive black coffee and zero sleep. As the founder and lead strategist of a highly secretive corporate acquisitions firm, my life often required these grueling marathons. We had just closed the most complex, fiercely contested buyout of my entire career. I was physically depleted, my immune system was practically non-existent, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been turned to lead. But I was there. I had promised my younger sister, Julia, that I would make it to her engagement party. I hadn't had time to stop at my penthouse to change into the designer silk dress hanging in my closet. I had come straight from the boardroom, still wearing the faded, heather gray, $10 hoodie and plain blue jeans I always wore during marathon negotiation sessions. I knew I looked rough, but I assumed the people who loved me would just be happy I had made the effort to show up to celebrate this milestone. I was wrong, so incredibly, deeply wrong. The moment I stepped past the elaborate floral arrangements and into the main ballroom, the room's energy shifted. The ambient hum of string quartets and clinking champagne glasses seemed to pause. I spotted Julia immediately. She was wearing a sparkling, custom-fitted gown that cost more than most people's cars. Next to her stood Owen, her new fiancé. I walked toward them, forcing a weary but genuine smile onto my face, ready to offer my congratulations. "Julia Owen," I said, my voice raspy from days of talking. "I made it. Congratulations." Owen turned to look at me. He didn't smile. Instead, his eyes slowly raked up and down my exhausted frame, taking in the frayed cuffs of my hoodie and my scuffed sneakers. A slow, incredibly condescending smirk spread across his perfectly moisturized face. He let out a sharp, scoffing laugh that was loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Owen announced, his voice projecting across the immediate circle of family and friends. "Genesis. Wow, did you have to take an Uber pool to get here, or did you just walk from the bus stop?" A few guests chuckled nervously. I froze, the exhaustion suddenly giving way to a spike of adrenaline. I looked at Julia, expecting her to immediately reprimand him. Expecting her to say, "Owen, don't be rude, my sister has been working." Instead, Julia giggled. She actually covered her mouth with her manicured hand and giggled at my expense. My parents, Enzo and Riley, were standing just behind them. My mother, Riley, let out a dramatic, long-suffering sigh, shaking her head as if I were a lost cause. "Oh, Genesis," my mother murmured loudly. "We told you this was a formal event. You really couldn't have saved up to buy a nice blouse for your sister's special day? It's just embarrassing." "She's always been a bit of a drifter, hasn't she?" My father, Enzo, added with a dismissive wave of his hand, swirling his whiskey. "Never could hold down a real corporate job like Owen here." I stood there, completely isolated in a sea of my own family. My chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. I had paid off my parents' mortgage 3 years ago anonymously through a family trust so they wouldn't feel indebted. I had quietly funded Julia's entire out-of-state college tuition because she had cried about wanting the full experience. I had sacrificed my 20s, working myself to the bone in absolute secrecy, just to make sure they were all comfortable. And yet, because I didn't flaunt my wealth, because I didn't wear my bank account on my sleeve, they viewed me as the family failure. Owen stepped closer, invading my personal space, practically radiating expensive cologne. "Look, Jen," he said, using a nickname I despised. "I know things are probably tight for you with whatever little freelance gigs you do, but when Julia and I are married, we can't have you showing up to our functions looking like a charity case. It reflects badly on my position at the firm." He patted my shoulder, a patronizing, heavy-handed pat. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. The exhaustion was too heavy, and the shock was too deep. I just looked at my sister, who was actively avoiding my gaze, too busy admiring her diamond ring to care about the public humiliation of her own flesh and blood. The public humiliation was agonizing, but the sound of my own sister's laughter was a betrayal far worse than any insult he could have thrown. The rest of the evening was a blur of emotional survival. I retreated to a dimly lit corner of the venue, near a towering ice sculpture that was slowly melting onto a silver tray. My hands were shaking, not from the caffeine anymore, but from a deep, profound sense of heartbreak. The physical ache in my body was completely overshadowed by the crushing weight of their rejection. I watched them from afar. I watched Owen holding court, loudly bragging to anyone who would listen about his VP status and the massive corporate merger his tech company was undergoing. I watched my parents fawn over him, hanging onto his every boastful word as if he were royalty. I watched Julia looking at him with utter adoration, completely captivated by the illusion of his success. After about an hour, I couldn't take the noise anymore. The room felt suffocating. I slipped away into one of the luxurious, marble-lined restrooms to just catch my breath and splash some cold water on my face. I gripped the edges of the sink, looking at my pale, tired reflection. I looked exactly like what they thought I was, a worn-out, struggling woman who didn't belong. The restroom door swung open, and the sharp clicking of heels echoed against the tile. It was Julia. She walked over to the mirror next to mine, pulling out a tube of expensive lipstick. She didn't look at me directly, she only looked at my reflection. "Genesis," she started, her tone clipped and annoyed. "Did you really have to do this tonight?" I slowly wiped my face with a paper towel. "Do what, Julia? Attend your engagement party?" "You know exactly what I mean," she snapped, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the sisterly warmth I had always tried to cultivate. "You showed up looking homeless. Owen's bosses are out there. His colleagues are out there. Do you have any idea how important image is to him? To us? You completely humiliated me." "I humiliated you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Julia, I've been working for 3 days straight. I wanted to be here to support you. And your fiancé just mocked me in front of 50 people and you laughed." Julia rolled her eyes, an exaggerated, deeply teenager-like gesture. "Oh, please, don't play the victim. Owen was just making a joke. You're always so sensitive. If you actually cared about supporting me, you would have bought a dress. You would have made an effort. But you always do this, Genesis. You always have to be the weird, quirky one who refuses to grow up and get a real career." She capped her lipstick with a sharp click and turned toward the door. "Just try to stay out of the way for the rest of the night, okay? Owen is about to give his toast." She walked out, letting the heavy wooden door slam shut behind her. I stood alone in the quiet restroom, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The hurt in my chest began to harden. It calcified, turning from sorrow into something much colder, much sharper. They thought I was a failure. They thought Owen was their golden ticket. I looked back at my reflection in the mirror, letting a small, humorless smile touch my lips. They were so confident in their cruelty, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand how deeply this cut, you have to understand the history I shared with my family. From the time I was 18, I had been the silent pillar holding up our crumbling foundation. When my father and Zoe made a terrible investment that nearly cost them our childhood home, it was my freelance tech work, which was actually the early, highly lucrative coding algorithms I had developed and sold, that quietly replenished their bank accounts through a dummy corporation. When Julia wanted to drop out of her local community college because she felt stifled, I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks to cover the out-of-state tuition at the prestigious university she demanded to attend. I drove a beat-up sedan, she drove a brand-new convertible. I ate ramen in a studio apartment, she lived in a luxury dorm. I did it all willingly, out of a deep, perhaps naive sense of familial duty. I wanted them to be happy. I wanted them to be secure. And because I operated my current firm under strict non-disclosure agreements and stealth wealth principles to avoid exactly this kind of superficial behavior, they had no idea of the empire I had built. And now, they had replaced their respect for me with reverence for Owen. I left the restroom and returned to the edge of the ballroom, observing Owen with the analytical eye I usually reserved for hostile corporate targets. Up close, without the blinding filter of familial affection, the cracks in his facade were glaringly obvious. He was incredibly polished, yes. His suit was bespoke, his teeth were blindingly white, and his hair was styled with expensive precision. But it was all a little too loud, a little too desperate. I listened to him talking to my father, Enzo. "It's all about synergistic paradigms, Enzo," Owen was saying, swirling a glass of champagne. "As a vice president of strategic growth, I'm spearheading initiatives that are completely disrupting the sector. The merger we're closing tomorrow, it's going to catapult us into the stratosphere. I'll probably be running the entire division by next quarter." It was pure corporate word salad. He used a lot of buzzwords, but said absolutely nothing of substance. Later, I saw him cornering my mother, Riley. He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Riley, I was wondering. Julia mentioned that the family home has a significant amount of equity built up. Have you and Enzo ever considered leveraging that for a high-yield investment vehicle? I have some private connections. I'd hate to see that capital just sitting there stagnating when it could be working for our future." My stomach turned. He wasn't just arrogant, he was predatory. He was already sniffing around my parents' assets that I had secured for them. Then he made the mistake of turning his attention back to me. He walked over, a smug smile plastered on his face. "So, Genesis," he said loudly, making sure the people nearby could hear. "Julia tells me you do computers. Setting up Wi-Fi networks and things like that for small businesses. That's cute. Good for you for staying busy. But tell me, do you ever plan on getting a W-2? Buying a house instead of renting whatever little apartment you're in? You know, building actual equity." He flashed his wrist, making sure the heavy, gold watch caught the chandelier light. I recognized the watch. It was a very good replica, but a replica nonetheless. The weight of the metal on the bezel was slightly off. "I'm perfectly content with my equity, Owen," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm and neutral. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Right. Content. Well, if you ever need a reference for an entry-level IT desk job, let me know. I might be able to pull a few strings with the HR department at my firm. We do a lot of charity hires." He walked away, leaving me standing there as my parents beamed at his retreating back. I didn't say another word for the rest of the night. I didn't need to. I just watched him celebrate his imaginary kingdom, knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. The drive back to my apartment was entirely silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call a friend to vent. I just stared out the window of the private, tinted town car that my firm kept on retainer, watching the city lights blur into streaks of pale yellow and harsh white. The profound exhaustion that had threatened to drop me to the floor just hours ago had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. The sadness was still there, a heavy ache sitting squarely in the center of my chest, but it was being rapidly eclipsed by a rising tide of calculated determination. My family had made their choice. They had looked at a lifetime of my quiet, steady loyalty and chosen the loud, empty promises of a man they barely knew. They thought I was a failure because I didn't wear my bank account like a costume. I walked into my penthouse, a sprawling, minimalist space that occupied the entire top floor of a secure, ultra-exclusive high-rise, and dropped my keys onto the marble entryway table. I didn't bother changing out of my $10 hoodie. I walked straight to my home office, a room dominated by a massive mahogany desk and 4 encrypted, high-definition monitors. I sat down, the leather of my chair creaking softly in the quiet room, and woke up my system. Owen had been arrogant enough, and foolish enough, to loudly broadcast the exact name of the tech firm he worked for and the massive corporate merger that was supposedly going to make him a wealthy division leader. He had spent 20 minutes lecturing my father about the genius of Strato's technology and their upcoming acquisition. What Owen did not know, what no one outside of my absolute inner circle of senior partners knew, was the identity of the acquiring firm. Vanguard Acquisitions, my company, was the silent buyer. We specialized in aggressive takeovers of bloated, mismanaged tech companies, restructuring them from the inside out. I was the architect of the Strato's buyout. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I was scheduled to walk into their executive boardroom, reveal myself as the new majority shareholder, and begin the brutal process of clearing out their incompetent management team. I typed in my administrative credentials and accessed the highly classified digital data room that held every single internal document for Strato's technology. As the incoming owner, I had unrestricted, legal access to their entire server. HR files, financial disclosures, internal communications, expense reports, everything was at my fingertips. I opened the employee database and typed his name into the search bar. When his file populated on my screen, I actually let out a dry, humorless laugh. The reality was so much more pathetic than I had even anticipated. Owen was not a vice president of strategic growth. He wasn't anywhere near the executive suite. He was a Tier 3 regional sales manager. His base salary was completely average, barely enough to cover the lease on the luxury sports car he had driven to the engagement party, let alone the massive, flawless diamond ring currently sitting on my sister's finger. But it was the internal disciplinary flags that truly caught my attention. I clicked into his HR addendums and found a litany of formal warnings. He had been placed on a performance improvement plan 3 months ago for consistently missing his quotas. Worse, there were 2 separate inquiries from the accounting department regarding gross irregularities in his corporate expense reports. He had been charging lavish dinners and entirely fabricated client entertainment, expenses to the company dime to fund his personal lifestyle. He was drowning in debt, professionally hanging by a thread, and using my sister and potentially my parents' home equity as his financial lifeboat. The trap was already set. He had built his own guillotine. I just needed to pull the lever. But before the corporate executions scheduled for tomorrow's board meeting, I needed to give Julia one last chance to see the truth. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the screen as I drafted a message to my sister. "Julia, we need to talk. Alone. Meet me at the roasting cafe near your apartment at 7:00 a.m. It is a matter of absolute urgency regarding Owen. Do not tell him I am meeting you." I hit send, leaning back in my chair. The sun was just beginning to peek over the city skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across my office. I hadn't slept in nearly 80 hours, but I had never felt more awake. The cafe was practically empty when I arrived at 6:45. The smell of roasted espresso beans and fresh pastries hung heavily in the air. I ordered a black coffee, chose a small, secluded table in the far corner, and waited. At exactly 7:10, the little bell above the glass door chimed, and Julia walked in. She looked terrible. The glowing, triumphant bride-to-be from the night before was gone, replaced by a tired, anxious woman hiding behind oversized designer sunglasses. She kept her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she walked over and slid into the booth across from me. "This better be important, Genesis," she hissed, keeping her voice low but entirely hostile. "I am exhausted, my head is pounding, and if you dragged me out here just to apologize for your embarrassing behavior last night, a text would have sufficed." I didn't rise to the bait. I simply reached into the leather portfolio I had brought with me and pulled out a single, neatly printed piece of paper. I slid it across the wooden table toward her. "I am not here to apologize," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I am here to protect you. I need you to look at that document." Julia frowned, looking down at the paper. It was a redacted summary of Owen's actual employment status, showing his real title and his base compensation. "What is this?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly as her eyes scanned the numbers. "That is reality, Julia," I told her, keeping my gaze locked on her face. "Owen is not a vice president. He has no executive authority. He makes a fraction of what he implies he makes, and he is currently on probation for failing to meet his basic job requirements. The lifestyle he is selling you is a complete, fabricated illusion." Julia's face flushed a deep, angry red. She pushed the paper back across the table as if it were on fire. "You are insane. You are actually deeply insane. You're so jealous of my happiness, so bitter that you haven't achieved anything in your own life, that you're forging documents to try and ruin my engagement." "I didn't forge anything," I replied softly. "Julia, please, just think critically for one moment. Look at the watch he wears, the weight is wrong, it's a replica. Look at how he speaks in empty corporate buzzwords. He is targeting mom and dad's house equity because he has no capital of his own. He is drowning." Before Julia could respond, the cafe door flew open with a violent slam. It was Owen. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he was wearing a tight athletic shirt, looking breathless and furious. He must have seen her location on her phone or followed her. He stormed across the cafe, his eyes locked onto me with pure, unadulterated venom. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Owen snarled, slamming his hands flat onto our table, making our coffee cups rattle. He looked down at the printed paper, and for a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed in his eyes before it was quickly masked by rage. "I am having a conversation with my sister," I said, entirely unfazed by his physical intimidation. I didn't even blink. "Owen, she's crazy," Julia stammered, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "She's showing me these fake papers, saying you're just a salesman." Owen let out a loud, theatrical laugh, but it sounded strained. "Fake papers? Genesis, are you seriously resorting to corporate espionage? Do you have any idea how illegal it is to hack into a company's private server? I could have you arrested for this. I will call my legal team right now and have you destroyed." He was trying to play the powerful executive, but his threats were incredibly hollow. "Corporate espionage?" I repeated, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "I would love for you to call your legal team, Owen. Please, put them on speakerphone. Let's discuss your expensed dinners at the steakhouse downtown that you claimed were for the Henderson account, an account that doesn't actually exist." Owen's face drained of all color. He looked like he had just been physically struck. The smug arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered animal. He started, his voice suddenly lacking all of its previous booming confidence. "How do you?" "You are a fraud, Owen," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet cafe like a scalpel. "And you are done manipulating my family." Owen grabbed Julia's arm, pulling her up from the booth. "We are leaving, right now. Do not listen to a word this psychotic, jealous loser says, Julia. She is just trying to poison us." Julia looked terrified, torn between the physical evidence sitting on the table and the desperate, commanding grip of the man she thought she loved. She let him pull her toward the door, looking back at me with tears welling in her eyes. "You're dead to me, Genesis," Owen shouted back as he shoved the cafe door open. "You hear me? You are nothing." I sat alone at the table, calmly taking a sip of my black coffee. He had no idea just how wrong he was. I left the cafe and had my driver take me directly to the Vanguard corporate tower. The confrontation with Owen had only confirmed my worst fears. He was not just going to walk away. He was going to cling to Julia, using her as a shield to protect his fragile ego and his financial lifeline. I needed to shatter his illusion entirely, and I needed to do it with an overwhelming, undeniable force. I rode the private elevator up to my executive suite, the doors sliding open to reveal a sprawling expanse of glass, polished steel, and quiet, hyper-efficient activity. My assistant, a brilliant and fiercely loyal woman named Sarah, was already waiting at my desk with a thick, leather-bound dossier. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," Sarah said, handing me the file. The finalized due diligence report on Strato's technology, completely vetted by the legal team. And per your specific instructions, I had the private investigators dig deeper into Marcus Thorne's, excuse me, Owen's background. I took the file and walked into my corner office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the entire city. "And?" I asked, flipping the heavy cover open. "It's worse than we anticipated," Sarah noted, her tone strictly professional. "His employment history is a string of rapid departures, mostly due to mutual separations following allegations of financial mismanagement. But more importantly, the PI found 2 previous civil judgments against him in out-of-state courts, both for defrauding former domestic partners out of significant sums of money under the guise of investment opportunities." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just a corporate failure, he was a serial predator. He found successful, stable families, embedded himself within them, and drained their resources before moving on. He was currently attempting to execute the exact same playbook on my parents and my sister. I sat down at my desk, methodically reviewing the court documents, the bank statements, and the irrefutable proof of his predatory history. I had everything I needed to not only fire him, but to ensure he never worked in the corporate sector again. My private cell phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed Julia's name. I answered it immediately. "Julia." "Genesis, please," she sobbed into the phone, her voice thick with tears and sheer panic. "Owen is. He's screaming. He's pacing around the apartment throwing things, saying that you're trying to ruin his promotion, that you're a hacker. He's demanding that I call Mom and Dad and tell them to completely cut you off. He wants me to block your number." "Julia, listen to me very carefully," I said, projecting absolute calm and authority, refusing to let her get swept up in his chaos. "Owen is panicking because he knows he has been caught. I did not hack anyone. I did not forge in. Ithing, I am telling you the absolute truth." "But how could you possibly know all of that about his company?" she cried, clearly struggling with the massive cognitive dissonance. "You just do freelance computer work, you wear hoodies. How do you have his corporate files?" "I am going to show you," I promised her. I looked at the platinum clock on my desk. It was 8:15. The Strato's technology board meeting was scheduled for 9. "Where is Owen right now?" I asked. "He just left," Julia sniffled. "He put on his best suit. He said he has the most important board meeting of his life this morning, and that once this merger goes through, he's going to use his new power to have you legally destroyed." "Perfect," I said. "Julia, I need you to do exactly as I say. Get dressed. Order a car. I need you to come to the Strato's technology headquarters downtown. Go straight to the executive floor reception area. Do not tell Mom and Dad. Just come. You need to see this with your own eyes, or you will never truly believe me." "Genesis, I can't just show up at his office," she protested weakly. "If you ever want to know the truth about the man you are about to marry, you will be there at 9 o'clock, I stated firmly. "Trust me. For once in your life, just trust me." I ended the call, leaving her no room to argue. I stood up, smoothing the front of my expensive, impeccably tailored power suit, the armor I wore for war. The $10 hoodie was packed away. It was time for the family failure to go to work. The Strato's technology headquarters was a monument to corporate excess. It was a soaring, 90-story tower of reflective glass and cold, brushed steel that dominated the downtown financial district. As my private car pulled up to the heavily guarded VIP entrance, I didn't feel the crushing exhaustion of the past 3 days. I felt nothing but the absolute, humming precision of a predator stepping into its own territory. I bypassed the main lobby entirely, utilizing the private executive elevators reserved exclusively for C-suite management and board members. The doors slid open on the 80th floor, revealing a sprawling, silent reception area decorated in minimalist, expensive taste. The air up here smelled of polished mahogany, ozone, and the distinct, palpable scent of corporate anxiety. My assistant, Sarah, was already there, perfectly poised and waiting with the Vanguard transition team. She handed me a sleek, black tablet containing the final, legally binding acquisition documents. The current Stratos executive board is assembled in the primary conference room, Ms. Vance. Sarah informed me in a hushed, professional tone. They are fully briefed on the transition of power. They are terrified, but compliant. And my sister? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She is currently in the lower reception area. My security liaison is bringing her up now. I have arranged for her to wait in the adjoining observation suite. The glass is soundproofed from the outside, but she will have full audio feed of the boardroom. She will see and hear everything. Good, I nodded. Let's begin. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. Two heavy, frosted glass doors stood at the end of the corridor. A security guard pulled them open for me, and I stepped into the room. The Stratos boardroom was massive, featuring a sprawling, custom-built oak table that could comfortably seat 30 people. Sitting around it were the top executives of the company, the CEO, the CFO, the lead legal counsel. They were older men and women in immaculate suits, and they all fell dead silent the moment I entered. They knew who I was. They knew Vanguard Acquisitions was a ruthless, highly efficient machine that carved up failing companies. And they knew I held their professional futures in the palm of my hand. The CEO, a gray-haired man named Richard, immediately stood up, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. Ms. Vance, it is an honor to finally meet you in person. We have prepared the preliminary restructuring reports as requested. Sit down, Richard, I said smoothly, walking past him and taking the heavy leather chair at the absolute head of the table. I placed my tablet in front of me and folded my hands. We have internal housekeeping to handle before we discuss the macro-level restructuring. Call in your Tier 3 regional sales managers, all of them. Now. Richard swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Of course, right away. He pressed a button on the intercom system built into the table. Attention, all Tier 3 regional managers. Please report to the primary executive boardroom immediately. I sat in silence, letting the tension in the room build until it was almost suffocating. 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors swung open again. A group of 6 mid-level managers filed into the room, looking bewildered and incredibly nervous. They were used T.O. operating on the lower floors. Being summoned to the 80th floor executive suite without warning was highly irregular. And right in the middle of the pack was Owen. He was wearing a dark, double-breasted suit that was trying much too hard to look authoritative. His hair was slicked back, and he walked with that same arrogant, rolling swagger he had displayed at the engagement party. He was practically vibrating with unearned confidence, clearly believing that this summons was the magical promotion he had been boasting about. He walked toward the center of the table, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of his superiors. Then, his gaze shifted to the head of the table. He saw me. For a span of about 5 seconds, his brain completely short-circuited. He blinked, shaking his head slightly as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at my impeccably tailored, charcoal gray suit, then looked back at my face. The smugness morphed into utter, baffled confusion. "Genesis?" he blurted out, his voice loud and entirely inappropriate for the setting. He actually let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What in the world are you doing here? Did security let you up here by mistake? Or wait, did Stratos hire your little freelance company to fix the Wi-Fi in the lobby?" A collective, horrified gasp echoed around the boardroom. The CFO actually covered his eyes with his hand. I didn't move a single muscle. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch out, letting his disrespectful, foolish words hang in the air for everyone to examine. "Mr. Thorne," Richard, the CEO, barked, his voice cracking like a whip. He was pale with absolute terror. "You will shut your mouth this instant. You will address Ms. Vance with the ultimate respect her position commands." Owen looked at his CEO, entirely lost. Respect? Richard, with all due respect, I know this woman. She's my fiancé's sister. She does entry-level IT desk work. She wore a $10 sweatshirt to my engagement party last night. Richard slammed his hand down on the oak table. I do not care what she wore to your party, you incompetent fool. That woman sitting in front of you is Genesis Vance. She is the founder, the lead strategist, and the chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions. As of 8 o'clock this morning, her firm purchased a controlling 74% stake in this company. She is the new majority shareholder. She owns Stratos Technology, and she owns your employment contract. I watched the exact moment Owen's entire reality shattered. It was a physical transformation. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw went slack, and his shoulders, previously puffed out in false bravado, completely caved in. The arrogant, untouchable executive vanished, replaced by a terrified, cornered fraud. He stumbled back a half step, his eyes wide and locked onto mine, finally understanding the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the trap he had walked into. I tapped the screen of my tablet, projecting his employee file onto the massive digital monitor mounted on the wall behind me. Let's discuss your value to my new company, Owen, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet authority was far more devastating. You have spent the last 6 months telling my family that you are a vice president of strategic growth. Yet, according to HR Addendum 4B, which is currently displayed behind me, you are a Tier 3 sales manager who has missed his quarterly quotas for 3 consecutive cycles. Owen opened his mouth, but only a dry, breathless wheeze came out. He looked around wildly, realizing that every single senior executive in the company was staring at him with absolute disgust. Furthermore, I continued, swiping my finger across the tablet, bringing up a new set of highly detailed financial documents on the main screen. I have ordered a full audit of your corporate expense accounts. In the last 60 days, you have charged over $14,000 to this company for client entertainment. These charges include luxury car rentals, fine dining, and premium club memberships. My legal team has verified that these clients do not exist. You have been systematically embezzling corporate funds to finance a personal lifestyle you cannot afford. Genesis, please, Owen finally choked out, his voice trembling so violently it was barely recognizable. He gripped the back of an empty leather chair to keep his knees from buckling. Ms. Vance, it's a misunderstanding. The accounts, they were prospective. I can explain the strategy. There is no strategy, Owen. You are a parasite, I stated coldly, refusing to break eye contact. But your theft from this company is actually the least of my concerns, because Vanguard Acquisitions runs full background checks on all retained employees during a buyout. I swiped the tablet one final time, the S. Screen behind me filled with heavily redacted, official legal documents. They were court judgments. 2 civil judgments in the state of Florida, I read aloud, making sure my voice carried perfectly to the hidden microphones that fed into the observation suite where my sister was sitting. Both judgments found you liable for defrauding former domestic partners. You embed yourself into their lives, you isolate them, and you drain their financial assets using fabricated investment opportunities. You are currently attempting to run this exact same grift on my parents, targeting the equity in their family home. Stop, Owen suddenly screamed, slamming his hands over his ears, losing whatever tiny shred of composure he had left. He looked like a cornered rat. Stop it, you're making this up. You hack the system. You're just a jealous bitter. The heavy boardroom doors flew open, hitting the wall with a deafening crack. Julia stood in the doorway. She was flanked by my security personnel, but she had clearly pushed past them. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but her expression was one of pure, unadulterated fury. She had heard everything. She had seen the documents. The illusion was dead. Julia, Owen gasped, his eyes darting between her and the screen. He took a step toward her, holding his hands out pleadingly. Baby, sweetheart, listen to me. She's lying. She manufactured all of this because she hates us. You know how she is. She's trying to ruin our wedding. Julia didn't say a word. She calmly lifted her left hand, grabbed the massive, flawless diamond ring that he had likely purchased with stolen company funds, and pulled it off her finger. With a hard, decisive flick of her wrist, she threw the ring directly at his chest. It hit his lapel and clattered loudly onto the polished mahogany floor, rolling away into the corner of the room. "Do not ever speak to me again," Julia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of profound heartbreak and absolute disgust. "Do not contact my parents. If you ever come near my family again, I will personally help Genesis destroy whatever is left of your pathetic life." She turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. Owen stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway, his entire world having collapsed in the span of 10 minutes. He looked back at me, his eyes hollow, finally understanding the true cost of his arrogance. I looked at Richard, the CEO. "Terminate his employment immediately," I ordered, my tone strictly business. "Revoke his building access, confiscate all company property, and forward the unredacted expense reports to our corporate litigation team. I want civil charges filed for the embezzled funds by the end of the day." "With pleasure, Ms. Vance," Richard nodded sharply, motioning to the security guard standing by the door. "Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building." As the guards grabbed his arms and hauled him backward out of the boardroom, Owen didn't fight them. He just stared at the floor, a broken, empty shell of a man, disappearing into the elevator banks forever. I turned my attention back to the terrified executives sitting around my new table. "Now," I said, folding my hands together once more, "let's discuss the future of this company." The fallout was swift, brutal, and utterly complete. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Owen had been formally evicted from his leased luxury apartment, as his building management had been quietly informed of his immediate termination and impending legal troubles. Vanguard's litigation team moved with terrifying speed, freezing his known assets pending the embezzlement investigation. Stripped of his fake title, his stolen funds, and his wealthy fiancé, he vanished from our lives as quickly as he had entered, a cautionary tale written in corporate ink. But the true resolution didn't happen in the boardroom. It happened in my parents' living room later that evening. I sat on the worn floral sofa in the house I had secretly paid off years ago. Julia sat next to me, leaning her head on my shoulder, emotionally exhausted but finally safe. Across from us sat my parents, Enzo and Riley. The atmosphere was heavy with a profound, uncomfortable silence. I had spent the last hour explaining everything to them. I bypassed the dummy corporations and the non-disclosure agreements. I told them about the early algorithms, the foundation of Vanguard acquisitions, the grueling 80-hour weeks, and the quiet, deliberate way I had structured my life to protect them from financial ruin. I showed them the true ownership documents of their home and the trust that had funded Julia's education. My father, Enzo, sat staring at the coffee table, his face buried in his hands. He looked 10 years older. My mother, Riley, was quietly weeping into a tissue, entirely overcome with shame. "Genesis," my father finally whispered, his voice cracking wit. Emotion. He couldn't even look me in the eye. We mocked you last night. We stood there and let that monster humiliate you because of a piece of clothing, while you were the one holding our entire lives together. I have never been so profoundly ashamed of myself as a father." "We thought you were lost, sweetheart," my mother sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. "We thought you didn't care about your future. We were so blinded by what he was showing us, by the suits and the bragging. We treated you terribly. How can you ever forgive us?" I looked at them, feeling the cold, hard armor I had worn all day finally begin to fracture and melt away. I didn't want them to grovel. I didn't want revenge against my own blood. I just wanted them to see me, truly see me. "I don't need apologies for the past," I said softly, reaching out to take my mother's hand. "I did those things because I love you. I kept it secret because I wanted you to live without the burden of feeling indebted to your own daughter. But going forward, the dynamic has to change. No more judging worth by outward appearances. No more ignoring the quiet loyalty for the loud lies. Never again, Julia murmured, squeezing my arm tightly. I promise you, Jen, never again. I was so stupid. You saved my life today. You saved your own life, Julia, I corrected her gently. You walked away, that took strength. In the weeks that followed, our family slowly began to heal. It wasn't an instant fix. There were still moments of awkwardness, and a deep, lingering guilt that my parents struggled to shake. But the toxic superficiality that had infected our dynamic was completely eradicated. Julia canceled the wedding entirely, returning the few gifts that had arrived and blocking every mutual contact she shared with Owen. She started spending more time at my penthouse, not to admire the sweeping views or the minimalist art, but simply to sit with me while I worked, brewing coffee and talking about real, honest things. As for me, I returned to Vanguard. The Stratos buyout was a massive success, catapulting my firm into an entirely new echelon of corporate power. I was busier than ever, navigating the complex waters of global acquisitions and market strategy. A few months later, we had a small, private family dinner at a quiet, unassuming Italian restaurant near my office to celebrate my father's birthday. There were no flashy outfits, no boastful speeches, and no performative wealth. Just genuine laughter, good food, and the warmth of a family that had finally found its true foundation. When the bill arrived, my father proudly reached for his wallet, insisting on paying. I smiled, letting him have the moment. I sat back in my chair, looking at my sister and my parents, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace settle over me. I had protected my family. I had exposed a predator, and I had done it all without ever needing to change who I was. As we walked out into the cool evening air, I pulled up the hood of my faded, $10 gray sweatshirt, entirely comfortable, entirely secure, and exactly where I was meant to be.